Hi, this is Haley Bernhard, and this is my Connect Extend Challenge video for Chapter 3 on standardized testing. The first portion is to connect. How does this info connect to what you already know? So I was already vaguely familiar with standardized assessments such as the APGAR score and the Ages and Stages questionnaire. I have a 2-year-old son, so we were given his APGAR scores when he was born, and we participate in a county resource center's early childhood development programs and classes, and they perform an ASQ every year on him, so we have completed a couple of those. I have also worked tangentially with the Battelle Developmental Inventory when I led a 2-year-old class at a daycare. One of my students received services for speech and language development, and she often had a specialist visit her in class. I facilitated the administration of parts of the test in the classroom and responded to some parts of the test myself when educator input was required. As a result of this and other evaluations they did on this student, I worked with the specialist to implement classroom strategies designed to benefit my students in general and this particular student. I was also familiar with the importance of assessment and evaluation results as documentation for planning IEPs, individual education plans, and for students with disabilities, but I was not familiar with how these assessments and evaluations were chosen. The next part is extend. So what new ideas extended my thinking? I was interested in the categories of the preschool tests of screening, diagnostic, language, and achievement. It was helpful to see these categories differentiated as a way to understand the differences in how evaluations and assessments can benefit children, educators, and families. And I was particularly interested in the language tests as English language learners or LEP learners are a large part of the population in South Florida, so it's likely that I and many of my classmates will be using these tests often. I found this section about how to determine which tests to use in particular situations very helpful in understanding considerations of age, ability, cost, training, etc. It did seem a bit overwhelming until that section provided information on resources like tests in print, mental measurements yearbooks, and test critiques. And I'm grateful for resources like these as a way to use the experiences and insight of others to determine the best possible assessments and evaluations for children, families, and educators. Last part is to challenge. What challenging or confusing information did I come across? To go back to the language assessments, language tests for preschool students and also mentioned elsewhere in the text for older students are mostly listed as available in English and Spanish. And I wonder if these assessments are also available in additional languages to account for the large number of immigrants in the United States. For example, I know that California has a large immigrant population from Asian countries, and I wonder how these assessments or evaluations are performed for these families. I also wonder what the path for assessments and evaluations, how the path for assessments and evaluations is determined or scaffolded. For example, the Bender Visual Motor Gestalt test for children is administered to determine if a child requires educational services for children with disabilities. If this test determines that a child does require further evaluation, how are these next assessments determined? I assume that I know that the child would be referred to a specialist who'd be familiar with the evaluations required to come to a conclusion, but I would be interested to learn more about the process of choosing an appropriate evaluation for an individual situation. Overall, this was a very informative and engaging chapter, and it's given me a lot to think about.